Hi, glad to see you on your channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. Have a good view. The Vietnam War of 1957 to 75 was one of the largest localized conflicts of the Cold War period. Under the 1954 Geneva Accords, which ended the Indochina War, Vietnam was divided along the 17th parallel into northern and southern parts. On July 16, 1955, South Vietnamese Prime Minister Ngo Dinh Diem announced that he would not abide by the Geneva Accords and an anti-communist state would be established in South Vietnam. In 1957, the first units of the anti-Diem underground appeared in South Vietnam and began a guerrilla war against the government. In 1959, the North Vietnamese communists and their allies declared their support for the South Vietnamese guerrillas. And in December 1960, all underground groups united to form the National Front for the Liberation of South Vietnam, which was more commonly referred to as the Viet Cong in Western countries. The weapons used by the South Vietnamese guerrillas were very diverse. It had to be obtained in battles through the introduction of covert agents in the enemy camp, as well as through supplies from communist countries through Laos and Cambodia. As a result, the Viet Cong was armed with a variety of both Western and Soviet weapons. Echoes of a previous war. During the Indochina War, which lasted from 1946 to 1954, the French army fighting to preserve French colonial possessions in Indochina was supported by Britain and the United States, while the Viet Minh National Liberation Movement was supported by Communist China. Because of this, the arsenal of Vietnamese guerrillas in the early 1960s was rich and motley in its composition. Viet Cong had submachine guns M-49 France, Stien Great Britain, PPSH-41 China, PPS-43 China, Mosin carbines and rifles USSR, Kar-98K carbines Germany, Mayas-36 rifles France, Browning machine guns USA, DP-28 USSR, MG-42 Germany. The most popular small arms of the Viet Cong were M-49, Kar-98K, Mosin rifles, and PPSH. American machine guns. Since the U.S. entry into the conflict, American material support for the Army of the Republic of Vietnam increased. Thompson and M3 submachine guns, M1 and Bar carbines began to arrive in the country. Some of these weapons immediately went to the Viet Cong guerrillas, as many ARV soldiers were disloyal to the current government and willingly provided small arms to their friends from the Viet Cong. It is worth noting that after the Vietnamese guerrillas got their hands on AK-47s, they gladly refused American and British weapons, as Soviet assault rifles were superior to the enemy's small arms. The only exception was the M3, which was very effective in close combat, from the factory to the jungle. With the introduction of the new American M16 rifle to the ARV in 1967-68, it also appeared in the Viet Cong's armament. Black Rifle, so it was dubbed by soldiers, showed low effectiveness during combat operations in the Vietnamese jungle. The barrel and bolt group of the MK supplied to Vietnam were not chrome-plated, and there were no cleaning kits. All of this caused the rifle to quickly become clogged with fouling and malfunction. For this reason, the M16 was not very popular with the Viet Cong guerrillas. The new M16A1 was modified based on the feedback received from soldiers who fought in Vietnam, and in 1967 it was adopted by the U.S. Army. Unlike its predecessor, the M16A1 was willingly used by both Americans and Viet Cong. The advantage of the M16A1 was its bayonet knife, but it was far inferior to the AK-47 in hand-to-hand combat, as its buttstock often split after a blow, which was not the case with the Soviet assault rifle. The controversial symbol of the Viet Cong, the M1 carbine, and the M3 submachine gun are considered symbols of the early guerrilla warfare in Vietnam. This primarily applies to units of local forces that were not well supported by the North Vietnamese. The light but powerful M1 carbine was easy to operate and repair, while the M3 submachine gun was indispensable in close combat. There are quite contradictory reviews about the M1 carbine. In Vietnamese museum expositions devoted to guerrilla warfare in the jungle, It is presented as the main weapon of the Viet Cong at the initial stage of the war. At the same time, a number of experts point out that the M1 is more properly called the best among the weapons available to the guerrillas. And with the advent of other small arms, the Vietnamese began to abandon the M1. Red weapons. The third stage in the development of the Viet Cong's armory comes during the Tet Offensive of 1968. During the offensive, the guerrillas suffered heavy losses, and to make up for them, the North Vietnamese People's Army sent some of its soldiers south with weapons. The North Vietnamese soldiers were armed with the new SKS carbines, AK-47 assault rifles, and RPD machine guns produced in China. The disadvantage of these weapons was their high aiming range. The AK-47 had a range of 800 meters, while the RPD and SKS had a range of 1 kilometer. Excessive in the conditions of Vietnam, where most of the shots were fired at point-blank range or from a very short distance. At the same time, the SKS was excellent at firing from unprepared positions, which was very important for the Viet Cong fighters. The RPG used in Vietnam was much lighter than its predecessors, which made it easy to carry. The most effective small arms of the Vietnam War was the AK-47. Guerrilla air defense. The main weapon of the Vietnamese guerrilla air defense was the DSHK large-caliber machine gun, which was very poor at shooting down American planes. The guerrilla air defense was more effective against helicopters, but this effectiveness was achieved more due to good camouflage. The Viet Cong machine gunners managed, remaining unnoticed, to bring the American helicopter to a close distance and fire the first round. After that, the guerrillas lost their advantage and became a good target for the helicopters. David's slingshot in the Viet Cong variation. As a distant semblance of artillery weapons, the guerrillas used a primitive slingshot in which a grenade was inserted. The grenade's tip was tied to a stable surface and broke off during launching. Such artillery had very low accuracy, but at the same time, the explosion of a grenade fired from the slingshot was almost always a surprise to American soldiers, who, calculating the distance between themselves and the enemy, did not expect it to come from a long distance. The creation of the slingshot was most likely dictated by the fact that the Vietnamese, who were stunted and physically weak compared to American infantrymen, were far inferior to the enemy in throwing grenades, a terrifying piece of metal. One of the most frightening weapons of the South Vietnamese guerrillas were not machine guns and automatic weapons, but traps that could meet American soldiers at any moment. These were mostly sharp spikes in a hole covered with branches and leaves, as well as metal cubes scattered across the fields with pointed rebar pointing inward. If a soldier's foot hit a cube, he would receive a laceration, and if he fell into a pit with spikes, he was likely to die. A bloody encounter with uninvited guests. For the American military, accustomed to opening the front door with their foot, the guerrillas prepared a pendulum whose sharp spikes cut into the abdomen and groin. By kicking the door, the soldier set in motion, not the side hinges, but a rotating mechanism with a shifted center of gravity, which suddenly digs into the lower part of the body with metal spikes. Often the spikes of this and other similar traps were made poisoned, and even if the soldier easily tolerated the mechanical injury, he was later tormented and often died from the poison in his blood. Homemade mines. The Viet Cong guerrillas achieved great skill in the development of homemade mines. The device of most Viet Cong mines was that by pressing down on it from above, an enemy soldier would activate a nail that struck the cartridge primer, which would shoot the man in the leg. In addition to the semblance of anti-personnel mines planted on the ground, the Viet Cong used a variety of explosive mechanisms filled with dirty bamboo chips that would be embedded in the enemy's body, infecting the blood. When a soldier was wounded in this way, he was most often killed by an infectious infection because the chips were not visible on X-rays, and removing them from the body was a very difficult task for Army medics. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. See you soon.